And resuming debate, and the honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with great pleasure that I rise in the House today and speak in favour of Bill C-277, an act providing for the development of a framework on palliative care in Canada. Over the past 10 years I've served in this place, palliative care has been one of the issues on which I have spent a lot of time, and so I want to thank the honourable member, my colleague, the member from Sarnia-Lambton, for introducing this bill and taking up this great cause at this crucial time in Canadian history. This legislation is essential for two fundamental reasons. First, it addresses a major gap in our Canadian healthcare system. The vast majority of Canadians do not have access to an essential healthcare service, palliative care. Second, in a post-Carter Canada, we need to understand the realities and questions that Canadians now face nearing the end of their lives. My roles in serving as the co-founder of the Parliamentary Committee on Palliative and Compassionate Care, as member of the Joint Committee on Assisted Suicide and Euthanasia, and as an advocate for suicide prevention through the last decade inside this chamber and out. All of these experiences ultimately shape how I approach this subject and my deep conviction that we need to do better and we need to see this legislation passed and implemented as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, I also want to add that as a Christian, the value of life from conception until natural death and the recognition that life is a sacred gift from God also shapes how I approach the topic of understanding comfortable living for those living in their last days. I would like to begin with a quote from Jean Vanier, founder of L'Arche Canada, as recorded in the Parliamentary Committee on Palliative and Compassionate Care final report, not to be forgotten. Quote, "Each of us is fragile, with deep needs for both love and a sense of belonging. We begin and end our lives vulnerable and dependent, requiring others to care for us. In our states of dependence, our need cries out for attention and care. If this need is well received, it calls forth the powers of love in others and creates unity around us, the gift of the vulnerable to our world. If our cry and our need are unmet, we remain alone and in anguish. The danger in our culture of productivity and achievements is that we easily dismiss and ignore as unproductive the gifts and beauty of our most vulnerable members, and we do so at our own peril, dehumanizing ourselves." End of quote. The question that we all need to ask ourselves is this: will we now withhold from our society the love, the care, the attention for most vulnerable, and in the process dehumanize not only those who need our care, but also ourselves, we who should be providing that care? Taken from the committee's report, not to be forgotten, quote, "Adequate palliative end-of-care life becomes more essential as the numbers of Canadians requiring these services grows. Canada is not providing adequate palliative care and end-of-life care for all who need it. In Canada, only 16 to 30% of those who need it receive palliative care. 16 to 30% is a failing grade in any ordinary exam. How much more so in the context of our dying fellow citizens, friends, and relatives?" Mr. Speaker, this is not merely a failing grade. This is a disastrous failing grade. Our report went on, quote, "Despite efforts made by palliative care providers, Canadians have a long way to go to meet our goal of quality end-of-life care. Canadians in all parts of our country should be able to get effective palliation of their pain and symptoms and have their psychosocial and spiritual needs addressed." End of quote. So the question is, what quality of life do we want to provide for Canadians? The provision of proper palliative care is absolutely essential if we are truly serious about maximizing the quality of life for all Canadians who find themselves in need of this additional support at a time when they are most vulnerable. Again, from our report, not to be forgotten, quote, "We recommend the federal government, in collaboration with provinces and territories, implement a right to home care, long-term care, and palliative care for all residents of Canada equal to the current rights in the Canada Health Act, to those services that are defined as insured health services, including hospital service, physician service, and surgical dental service." End of quote. Bill C-277 follows up with that same expectation, Mr. Speaker. The Minister, it quotes, "The Minister of Health must, in consultation with the representatives of the provincial and territorial governments responsible for health, as well as with palliative care providers, develop and implement a framework designed to give Canadians access to palliative care provided through hospitals, home care, long-term care facilities, residential hospices, that, among other things, quote, evaluates the advisability of amending the Canada Health Act to include palliative care services provided through home care, long-term care, and residential hospices. In a post-Carter Canada, we need to realize that the environment in which people approach the end of life has changed drastically. According to researchers Tang and Crane, quote, "The risk of suicide doubles for people with chronic pain," end of quote. Now that people have access to medically assisted suicide, I would argue that there's a high probability that this number may drastically increase as the Canadian population ages and experiences higher rates of chronic pain, as outlined above. But we know that good palliative care can eliminate virtually 99% of all pain. The heart of the issue, outlined well by the expert panel appointed by our previous Conservative government, is that a request for physician-assisted suicide cannot truly be voluntary if the option of proper palliative care is not readily available to alleviate a person's suffering. While palliative care is not exclusively for the terminally ill Canadians must be given the choice to live as well as they can for as long as they can. The government has failed to address this gap in our medical system, either through Bill C-14 or Budget 2016. Current provincial and territorial approaches to the delivery of palliative care are fragmented. Federal leadership is needed to ensure that all Canadians have access to the same services and quality of care. Mr. Speaker, there are almost always problems in gaining access to palliative care, and a good part of the reason is the lack of medical practitioners who feel qualified to provide state-of-the-art palliative care. There are not enough opportunities to access proper training. Recently, a large medical school in Ontario had 169 applicants for elective time specifically devoted to study palliative care, yet there was only room for 35 of those applicants to be placed in the program. This problem needs to be corrected. Again, Mr. Speaker, from not to be forgotten, quote, Dr. Valerie Schultz of the Schulich School of Medicine in London, Ontario, has developed a simple and effective way to get medical students interested in palliative care. Each year, 12 students from the undergraduate program become hospice volunteers, undergoing 30 hours of training, each being mentored by an experienced hospice volunteer. They visit clients in their homes. The experience is priceless for the future doctors, as it gives them a chance to meet and converse with people outside of the clinical environment, and without the need to bring a clinical perspective to the relationship. They relate to the hospice clients as persons, learning how they feel and react to the prospect of dying. Friendships are formed and lessons learned, which will be a lifelong value to future doctors in terms of person-centered care. The clients are also transformed. They're touched that a future doctor would care enough to spend time with them in a companion role. This program is worth emulation and broader application, end of quote. If larger numbers of medical and other healthcare students across Canada were able to experience one-on-one relationships as hospice volunteers, the positive effects on our medical culture would be immense. But we need our medical schools to increase available training options for those students who want access to specialized training. Bill C-227 is a step in the right direction in protecting vulnerable Canadians. It builds on the nonpartisan, unanimously supported work of previous parliamentarians, and I hope that all parties will be supporting this historic legislation. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me quote from an anonymous author as it relates to palliative care. Quote, "To cure sometimes, to relieve often, and to comfort always. This is our work." End of quote. Thank you.